And finally, for this week's throwback album, I got Elvis Costello's This Year's Model. Elvis Costello, like a lot of these artists that I'm looking at in these throwback albums, suffered a really big blow in my relationship with this music early on by me getting a hold of an Elvis Costello and the Attractions Greatest Hits album. And again, certainly greatest hits albums have their place. There are some groups where that totally makes sense for your relationship to be just with their greatest hits albums. But for me personally, as an album listener, you lose the cohesiveness and the understanding of each of those songs in the context of the album. But when you pull them out and put them on a greatest hits compilation, those songs are forever indelibly marked in my mind as the standout pop tracks. So when I listen to This Year's Model, all I can hear is, Pump It Up and Radio. They're his big hits that he's associated with. But the album itself has a lot more to say and a lot more to hang on than just those two songs. And those two songs contribute to this album in a way that's almost egalitarian. They don't stick out within the context of the album besides my own experience of them. And what you really miss, I think, by not understanding this album is exactly how defiant Elvis Costello was early in his career. Again, this is his second album, and for this album, he was a little bit dissatisfied with some of the work that had happened on his debut and wanted to, enliven it a little bit. So he assembled / hired this band, the Attractions, which were undeniably a rock band, and really created an album that was very aggressive and very forward-thinking in the way that it melded. It sort of ended up being the nexus of three really important styles at the time: new wave, punk, and rock / power pop. Now, the album was recorded very, very quickly because Elvis Costello was playing with the Attractions a lot at the time. The songs were very well practiced. The band had really great chemistry. And so by all accounts, they would just walk in and play the songs and walk back out. And most of the time, those takes were adequate. As a matter of fact, my understanding is that the guide tracks even that Elvis Costello did for his vocals often were the tracks that ended up finding their way into the final recording. Now, especially this early in his career, it's really interesting to look at Elvis Costello's arc, because later on, he would write these fantastic albums like Burt Bacharach, and later on, of course, Spike was another really wonderfully melodic album. But here, his approach was so nervous and like the angry geek persona that he was sort of trying to cultivate. That was all over this album. And so his approach was very aggressive, especially vocally. The melodies, of course, that he would be known for later are there, but in smaller bursts. Instead, it's very rhythmic, almost like, a very angry version of Bob Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues, or Chuck Berry, or even later on, like R.E.M. would do The End of the World as We Know It. It's about the verbiage. And of course, Elvis Costello was very well known at the time for his words. His songs were very lyrically driven, especially this early in his career. But the amount of intellect and intelligence and just sort of vision that he exhibited on this album, I think, is undeniable. And it's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people look at this album as one of the most essential Elvis Costello recordings.